Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's Bite-Size Talk. With us today is Felix Kummer. He is working at the Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin, and he is today introducing us to a new recently released NF Core pipeline called NF Core Rangeland, which was developed together with the collaborative, how was it again? Sorry, Collaborative Research Center, Fonda.
Yes, correct.
And now I'll give the stage to you, Felix.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the introduction. Just a few things to start this. So I'm going to present a Earth observation pipeline today, so not a bioinformatics pipeline. And also important to note that I'm actually not a Earth observation or a geography person, but I'm a computer scientist at the Fonda. Another thing that I want to note here is that I'm going to present a few things here that will be part of the next release and not of the current version, which is the version 1.0. And with that, let's get into the presentation. So what I'm going to present today is, first of all, like what are we actually doing with this pipeline and how did a non-bioinformatics pipeline end up in NF Core? I'm going to introduce the data that we are using as inputs and also the data that we are producing later on. Then I will talk about the pipelines and its individual step, why and who might use this, and what is planned for the future. Right. So let's start with the story a bit. So how did this pipeline actually came into existence? So all of this is based on a tool which is called Force. This is a project that was developed during a PhD of David Franz. And it is a tool for satellite imagery analysis. And it is basically the new thing about this is that it does a lot of things together in one tool and integrates multiple satellite sources. So based on that tool, they also published a paper which is called Revisiting the Past. You can see also a small picture of one of their main results on the slide here. And in this, they basically analyzed the vegetation on the island of Crete, and they did this using a large number of satellite imagery. Right, so this was kind of the first scientific workflow, and this is also the basic functionality of rangeland. So we want to analyze the vegetation dynamics, not only on Crete, but generally on some kind of area of interest. And this original version of the workflow was basically just a bash script. This was optimized for single server execution, and thus, not really what we might consider a scientific workflow at this stage. So next up, this guy David Franz, who was also a member of Fonda, and another colleague of mine, which is Fabian Lehmann, decided to, as a proof of concept, port this workflow to Nextflow. And the primary use case for this was more like, show that we can have Earth observation workflows in Nextflow, and also to perform research on the execution and scheduling of these workflows. So you see there's another paper there by Lehmann et al., which is a Force on Nextflow here. And this was just workflow execution research, so no real new functionality added to this workflow, but just researching the scheduling and execution of these workflows. And then this is where I come into the picture. So when this workflow was ported to Nextflow, someone from the NF Core community actually approached Fabian Lehmann and asked him to port this workflow if we would be willing to port this workflow to NF Core. And a couple of months later, I started as a student at the Earth Observation Lab, which is another institution at Humboldt University. It's a geography lab and also part of this Fonda project. And I basically got the task, as your initial task, you should port this to NF Core rangeland. So this didn't really this was way more than my initial task. I spent like probably 2 years doing that. And now I'm in my PhD on continuing the development. Yeah, so this is the entire story, how this workflow came into NF Core. And Now let's talk a little bit about the data. So I know that people in here are probably not geographers, so I want to talk a little bit more in detail what the data that we're using actually looks like. So on the screen, you can now see that. So this is kind of what you get when you get one observation from a satellite from the providers of this data more. And so this is a bit shortened. There are usually a few more files, but these are the files that actually contain data. First observation here is that there's a lot of metadata in these file names. This has been a pain in the ass to deal with when developing the rangeland workflow for end of core, but that's kind of standard in the community. So let's talk a little bit about the metadata here. So we start these file names with the LTO5 identifier. This is the name of the satellite mission. In this case, it's Landsat 5. So Landsat is this huge satellite constellation that has been in orbit since the 1970s. So we have a lot of data from these satellites. And there are also
Felix,
multiple. Yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but we can see the Skype, not the Skype, the Zoom box over the table. Is there a way for you to remove that?
that's still there.
Yeah,
Sorry. Yeah, that's why. Sorry.
perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Sorry for the
Yeah.
interruption.
Yeah, no, this the screen share is somewhere a bit weird, but okay. Yeah, so where was I? The next, I was talking about the Landsat mission. So these are like a large satellite constellation, and there are, I think the currently Landsat 9 is in orbit, so we have again a lot of data there. And the next metadata entry here is the pre-processing ID. So what you have to imagine is that the satellite doesn't take pictures. It just basically measures the reflectance of the Earth's surface. And so the providers of the satellite data apply their own pre-processing so that you can have these nice actual images. And so they assign a unique identifier to the process which was used to pre-process the raw data. And next up we have the row and path ID in the word reference system. So at the bottom of the slides, you can now see a picture. And there's of this reference system where you have the satellite paths, and this kind of just identifies where this observation was taken. Then we have the acquisition date, which is kind of self-explanatory. Then we have the pre-processing date and correction level and correction tier. And so all of these are related to this pre-processing process. We don't need to discuss this in more detail. And then, but more importantly, we have the band ID. So as you can see on the screenshot at the top, there are like B1 until B7. And so these are basically the different layers of the satellite image. So satellite imagery does not have three channels or three layers like your average RBG pictures. These have much more usually. In this case, we have the blue, green, near infrared, two shortwave bands, and the thermal band. So when I say band, you can imagine this being basically just channels for a regular picture. But we have more for advanced satellites than these three standard channels. Right, the last metadata entry or the file name is the tag image file format. It's a standard format in satellite imagery for raster imagery. So there are a few others, but we are mostly focusing on these TIFF files. Right, so now you might have been waiting for some actual satellite pictures. So now you can see here the raw green band of the data I showed before. So this is actually half of the island of Crete. And so it's a grayscale because this is just a green channel. So you're just seeing the values for greenness basically on this picture. And there are also like more complex things that you can do. There is like this very common freeband composite here where you reassign the channels. So what you see is red here is shortwave infrared, green is near infrared, and the blue channel displays the red light. And so this is a very common composite because the near infrared radiation is actually characteristic for vegetation. So everything that is green in this composite here may be vegetation. So one observation I want you to make here is that these images are quite raw. So first of all, we are not really focused on a single point here. So on the point of interest, there's a lot of water. the image is tilted, the edges are not really like straight lines. And there's also like clouds in this image, so we need to do some pre-processing with these. Yeah, another thing that I want to introduce shortly is the concept of the data cube. So when we process satellite imagery, we always have this common scheme that we want to align all of our data with. So yeah, on the left you can see a image how this might look like. We have all the data stacked up on each other on the time dimension, and yeah, this is also a bit simplified because we usually have more data sources, we have more channels to display. So they are usually like, if you would fully display a data cube, we would have multiple of these cubes for the different data. But the important thing is that everything is aligned in this common scheme. And you can also see this scheme a bit simplified on the right, where we have different tiles. We have the satellite image that is then being put into this raster scheme and shipped into multiple chips, and each of these chips is then only contains parts of a tile, basically. So this is also an input to our workflow. We have this. This is what one of these data cube files might look like. Yeah, don't be scared of this huge string. This is the projection. I've not talked about it. So what you have to imagine is that we process data here from a three-dimensional object, which is the Earth, which has a curvature and which is not flat. And we put this onto a two-dimensional map. So we need to have a way to project this onto this two-dimensional map. And the data cubes always have a single projection, which all the data is projected towards so that we can have a common analysis. Right, we have the grid origin, the coordinates for that, and both the projection and the latitude and longitude, and we have the tile and block size. Block size is something that is internal to this force tool, so we don't need to care about this. So don't need to explain it right here. So next up, we have our input data. We have one mandatory input source, which is a area of interest vector file. You can see an example of this on the top right. So this is just the area that we want to analyze as a vector file. And then there are other optional inputs, digital elevation model, like which basically characterizes the elevation on the Earth's surface. We have the water vapor database, which is the water vapor in the Earth's atmosphere, and we have an end member definition. I will talk about this later. And there might be other optional input, which is required for certain satellite missions. Right, so let's start with the first step in the pipeline, which is the preparation. Yeah, so here we just read this data cube definition and an area of interest. And the primary target here is just to restrict the downstream analysis task. We want to both restrict which tiles in this data cube grid structure are allowed to be processed. And we also want to identify which areas within these tiles should be processed. So this is done by the tile allow list task and also the analysis task, the analysis mask task. So next up we have one of the more important steps of the pipeline, which is the pre-processing. So here we actually read the satellite data and the optional inputs. And then we apply various corrections here and also align the input data with this grid scheme. And we also chip the input data. So we will see an example of this in a minute. And yeah, there are some notable steps here, which is cloud detection. It says on the slide and more, because cloud detection, Earth observation also includes things like cloud shadows or snow detection. Then we have topographic and atmospheric corrections. What we end up is something like this. So on the left, you can see a raw satellite image, and on the right, you can see what this looks like after pre-processing. So we got a whole bunch of these individual tiles from the grid screen that I introduced earlier, and we have basically this chipped input file into these smaller chunks. They're now quadratic. They are corrected, and we call this a bottom of atmosphere output. So this basically means that we applied corrections to the raw image, so that the view is like as if there would not be an atmosphere. So we removed all the atmospheric influences. And then there's also the quality layer on the right there, which is another output of our pre-processing. And here we basically classify all the pixels, if there are like clouds, if there are cloud shadows, and if they are usable for further analysis. So next up, we have the higher level processing, which in this case is a time series analysis. And this gets the pre-processed satellite data. And we want to uncover the trends in vegetation dynamics here. So this is done for every single tile of the grid, and it gets all of the pre-processed imagery for one of these grid tiles. And so this will be highly configurable in the next release, and I want to shed some light on the abilities that this module actually has. Yeah, so first of all, we can specify indexes should be used in this for the time series analysis. So there are 43 options here, and these are individual satellite bands, but also indexes which are computed based on our satellite bands. And then there is also the option for spectral mixture analysis. So we'll talk about this in a second. And yeah, on the right of this table, you can also see what we currently do in our test profiles and basically in the current release, and where some of this is still hard coded. So we have spectral mixture analysis here. We have NDVI, which is an index which is computed based on red near infrared bands, and this is usually used to detect changes in vegetation. And then we have all the other bands from our original imagery. Yeah, so let me quickly talk about spectral mixture analysis or spectral unmixing. So this is used, so let's imagine that we have a pixel, and this pixel is usually 30 by 30 meters in a satellite image. And then within this pixel, we of course will have different things. So you might have crop, you might have soil, you might have part of a road, part of a house or something. And what spectral mixture analysis allows us is to define certain spectral patterns that are interesting to us, and then evaluate how much of these spectral patterns are inside this pixel. So you can then have different components in the same pixel and analyze these individually. Next thing for configuration is the resolution. So yeah, basically self-explanatory. How large should the pixels be? We then have to upscale or downscale our data. The interpolation. So yeah, if you have a time series, you want to have a certain step length. So what's the distance between individual data points in your time series? And then you can basically define a function how to smooth or interpolate or extrapolate these time series. And we have the folding, so you can define. Let me get something to drink. Okay, so you have the folding where you can basically specify if you want to group and aggregate the data for a certain time frame for years, quarters, months, days of the week. And we have the land surface phenology polar matrix. So this is kind of the primary analysis technique here, where we take this time series and apply certain mathematical operations to derive these what Earth observation people will call polar metrics. And as an example, we could compute the value of the peak of the season, the value of the base level, or the value of the seasonal amplitude. This is what we do for our test profiles. And then we have the trend analysis itself, which is usually a change after effect in trend analysis. And this is also enabled in our test profiles. And this is just a small section of what is configurable. There are many more options, but I would say these are the most important ones. And okay, so next up, what is the output of this? So this is the output for a single tile from our test profile. You can see there are a lot of output products here. Let's have a look at one of these. So we have a output for a tile here. So this is the first part of the name. The X and Y coordinates, we have the time frame. So we have 1987 to 1989. So this is from a test profile where we just talk about 2 years. But the data or the outputs are not really meaningful because it's just 2 years. But And it's as an example here, then we have the amount of data that is being used or the time frame of for data. So day 1 to 365. We have HL, which means higher level TSA, time series analysis. Then we have this LNDLG, which is the identifier for Landsat missions. We have NDV, which is the index that is being used. VPS means the value for the peak of the season. And the CAO means that we are looking at the trend. So this is the change analysis output. This file has these layers, so all of these layers will be included. You can view all of them individually, and here are just some examples for the change or the year of change. Next up we have the visualization, which is the last step of the pipeline. So there are two ways to visualize the results. First one is the pyramid. It's just a lower resolution copy of the input data. Input data here is, of course, the output of our time series analysis. And then we have the mosaic visualization, which basically aggregates all the tiles into a single virtual raster file. And both these can be combined. Both these are optional. And so this might be an output of this mosaic visualization. So this is the entire island of Crete. And it is the NDVI, which is this index that I showed before. And for that index, the base level change, and it's mosaiced for the entire island of Crete. And this is basically also one of the outputs of the test profile. So you might think, may think why this is useful, who would use that? And so here I have some images again from the original paper that basically started rangeland. And you can see that there you can compute like different change patterns and in different cover types. So we have woody cover and herbaceous cover here. And then there are like these stats that are being computed. How much net gain do we have in over the observation period in these vegetation types. On the right, you can see that we can use the spectral mixture analysis to basically determine for each pixel which components are there. So herbaceous, woody, or non-photosynthetically active cover. And on the two images on the right, on the lower right, you can also see that basically the trends in woody vegetation and herbaceous vegetations over the entire time series. So next up, what's next for the pipeline? So first is the porting of the local modules to NF Core modules. This is possible thanks to our new NFT NFT TIFF plugin, which was developed by the NF Core community. And then, of course, this also enables better pipeline level tests and parameterization. So at the bottom, you can see two screenshots from all the parameters that we have introduced to the pipeline. And these will be part of the next release. So lastly, acknowledgements. So of course, the FORCE tool was developed by David Franz. We have the original Nextflow port, which was developed also by David Franz and Fabian Lehmann. We also have, Katarzyna Eva-Lewinska also helped me a lot with the Earth observation parts of this pipeline and also helped with the test data set. And then last but not least, the NF community. I could name a lot of names here, but I don't want to exclude somebody. But yeah, of course, I had a lot of support from you guys, and I'm grateful for that. So that was the last slide. Thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to receive questions.
Thank you very much. I'm always very happy to see non-buyer info pipelines at NF Core. It's super interesting. I have now allowed everyone to unmute themselves if they have any questions. I know that Thomas was interested in asking a question. Otherwise, I can also read it out if you prefer that. Okay, then I will read it out. So he's traveling. The question is, how do you handle the different remote sensing scales in the pipeline? So like 1 kilometer, 10 kilometers, or 100-kilometer tiles.
You mean for the input data? So, I mean, we define this data queue. where is it? Yeah, and we basically align, so we define a tile size here, and each input is then shipped into tiles of this size, and then we analyze only these smaller chips.
Does that answer your question, Thomas? In any case, are there any more questions in the audience? Otherwise, I actually have a question. So, who is the, let's say, the target user audience for this pipeline? Who would be using this pipeline?
Yeah, so people doing Earth observation science, in particular analyzing different types of grassland or rangeland, yeah, in any location they want.
And my second question, I was wondering, why did you focus on Crete specifically? Is this, yeah.
There's no real reason. This is just because we came from this one paper which focused on Crete, and this also has some history. Actually, I didn't say that, but so this revisiting the past paper also refers back to an older paper where they analyzed Crete with less images, and then now they repeated this with a larger amount of available satellite imagery. Yeah, but so there's no real reason why we went with Crete. It's just the example here, and this is basically the data that we already had in place.
Okay, it's a proof of principle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we have also executed this for our areas before. So I think Spain we also did. Yeah.
There's another question. How does it compare to other models, for example, Panopticon?
What exactly is Panopticon is my question now.
I cannot tell you that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that question then. I also not which models are meant here, like the data cube model.
Um, I assume so, because I think he wrote that while you were talking about the data cube. But maybe we can take this question offline, and you two can maybe connect on Slack if there are more questions. Yes. Great. Are there any more questions that I can ask or that people want to ask? So it doesn't seem so for now, but I guess you will be available in Slack for anyone who has any follow-up questions. And then I would like to thank you very much for, sorry, for a very interesting talk. And I also would like to thank the audience for joining us today. And I wish you all a great week. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.